What is a man? Although simple on the surface, this question can be answered in a multitude of ways. For example, looking at it from a science or a biological way, a man can be defined as someone or something born with a XY chromosome set. If you look at it from a sociology standpoint, a man can be defined as a character that exudes strength, courage, independence, leadership, and assertiveness. But I think, taking into account that we live in a consumer-centric capitalist society, the most important angle to look at this is from how men are portrayed in media. Some of the most popular male characters in media are, well, how do I put this? Not good people. According to IMDb, the highest rated show of all time is Breaking Bad. The protagonist of the show is Walter White, a man that you start off having sympathy for, but as the show goes on, it molds him into a villainous, evil person willing to do whatever it takes to keep hold of his money and power. Let's zoom into Breaking Bad a little more. Walter White is a lot of things, but most importantly, he's a husband and a father. Going back to the question I asked at the beginning of this video, what makes Walter White a man? Well, for him, it's being able to provide.
What does a man do, Walter? A man provides for his family.
He's an underpaid school teacher who has to provide for his wife, who is pregnant with their second child, and his son, who has cerebral palsy. Looking at the ways Walt acts in the early episodes of the show, he clearly feels emasculated. The one thing he believes a man should do is something he can't do himself. Walter is the embodiment of toxic masculinity. He defines his life by stereotypical gender roles, he's emotionally manipulative, he gets drunk on power and greed, and this is the protagonist of the highest rated show of all time. But media has been slowly drifting away from this male archetype, and at the pinnacle of that movement, shockingly, is video games. I say shockingly because, as you're probably aware of if you've played any live service multiplayer game, or just multiplayer game in general, the culture and communities within the gaming space are no stranger to toxic masculinity, or just straight up toxicity. Hell, Call of Duty lobbies in the late 2000s and 2010s were filled with young men and boys spewing racial and homophobic slurs at each other.
I don't know what's happening.
Yeah, you don't know what's happening because you're a fucking retarded.
And I wouldn't be surprised if you found the same culture still lingering in the communities built around the franchise's modern titles. And this isn't limited to in-game trash talk. For example, Gamergate was a movement in 2014 that claimed, as game studies scholars Shira Chess and Adrian Shaw put it, quote, "There is corruption in video games journalism and that feminists are actively working to undermine the video game industry." So it's safe to say that the gaming space can be toxic. So how is this the industry at the forefront of positive, mature male characters? Well, for that, we need to shift our gaze towards narrative-heavy, single-player experiences. There's a lot of them that we could pull from. This one. God of War. A PlayStation exclusive title published in 2018 by Santa Monica Studios, which went on to be the Game of the Year winner that year, beating stiff competition such as Insomniac's Marvel's Spider-Man and Rockstar Games' Red Dead Redemption 2. For those of you who don't know, God of War is actually a reboot for the franchise. The original God of War series was a Greek saga, a trilogy of games released from 2005 to 2010, following the anti-hero of Kratos, a demigod Spartan warrior and son of Zeus, who sold his soul to the god of war Ares after being tricked to kill his wife and daughter, essentially becoming enslaved to kill and do Ares' bidding. So when players were originally introduced to Kratos, he was a murdering machine on a rampage, bringing chaos anywhere he went. This is probably self-explanatory, but if you haven't played the game and you want to, stop watching this video. Like right now. In the 2018 reboot, also now known as the Norse Saga, Kratos is an old man. He's moved to Midgard, one of the realms in the Norse region, leaving his time in Greece and his past behind him. He's found love with a woman here, Leve, also known as Faye, and they've even had a child now, a young boy named Atreus. He isn't an agent of chaos anymore. Hell, to the outside world, he isn't even a god. He's chosen to live here as a mortal. To the outside world, he's just a man in Midgard, a father. Instead of going out on a worldwide tour of chaos, God of War 2018 sees Kratos and his son on an adventure to honor the wishes of Kratos' late wife and spread her ashes on the highest peak in all the realms. While on their adventure, they're hunted by Baldur, the son of Odin, and many other gods and monsters, and they utilize help from a multitude of characters, especially a witch of the woods, who we later learn is Freya, the goddess of love. What's interesting about Kratos, compared to a character like Walter White, is that when we first meet him, he's honestly pretty unlikable. In Breaking Bad, we're almost immediately given a handful of reasons to feel bad for Walter and to want to root for him. And while we're introduced to Kratos as a widower, his attitude isn't one that makes audiences open to sympathy. He is, similar to Walter White at the end of Breaking Bad, a prime example of hegemonic masculinity. You can define Kratos as being, quote, aggressive, stoic, dominant, and emotionally reserved, as outlined by papers published by UNESCO. So an important question to ask here is, who really is Kratos? Well, to get our answer, we don't need to go far into the game. Let's just look at the opening cutscene. I'll play it in full, and then we'll go back and analyze it.
Found some.
Get in the boat, boy.
So there's a lot to unpack here. Let's break it down step by step. As has been stated before, the core mission of the game is to honor the memory of Kratos' late wife by spreading her ashes among the highest peak in all the realms. As players, we aren't told how fresh this wound is, but we can assume that it's pretty recent. We see Leve's corpse at the beginning of the game, and we also see her become ashes. We can also just tell by looking at Kratos' expression when he essentially hugs this tree. Leve has marked it to be the tree that she wants to be cremated upon, and just by seeing it, Kratos is clearly struck with grief, and he's hurting. But Kratos lives his life according to older societal rules regarding men and emotional publicity that is rooted in toxic masculinity. As is outlined by Trong Thi Quyen Din in Brothers and Broken Dreams, Men, Masculinity, and Emotions in Platform Capitalism, quote, men are generally associated with reason and rationality, and there is a long-lived assumption that, quote, real men control their emotions. Performing self-control is a way for men to meet masculine norms and expectations in society. Kratos is the living embodiment of these ideas. We see that he forces himself to almost immediately disregard these emotions, reacting with what is almost rage. His self-control in this case is represented by him regaining his composure when his son Atreus comes into frame. But it's clear that Kratos is not done with the grieving process. I mean, listen to that yell during the final swing of his axe. Another key element of Kratos as a character is his past. To understand the growth he experiences within the events of this game, you need to understand where he's come from. As previously mentioned, Kratos was a murdering machine. By the end of the original trilogy, Kratos is, quote, irredeemable, killing anyone he encounters. With every god Kratos kills, the world around him grows more desolate. We could describe his past self as a, quote, highly militarized masculine ideal of strength, resourcefulness, combat readiness, a competitive spirit, a penchant for violence, and dominance in the theater of war. Yeah, that lines up. He is the god of war, after all. By the time we meet him in Midgard, hundreds of years have passed. Kratos is an older man now. He is not only distant from his past self via time, but he's also relocated himself far, far away from Greece. He's done everything he possibly can to put his past behind him, but there's one part that he can't escape: his godhood.
I know you're a god. Not of this realm, but there's no mistaking it.
Later in the game, Kratos states himself that when he came to Midgard, he chose to live here as a mortal.
I'm a god, boy. From another land far from here. When I came to these shores, I chose to live as a man.
He says this, but almost everyone he encounters is able to recognize that he is a god, whether it's by his skill, his looks, his strength, or just because they've heard of him. Everyone but one person: Atreus. We've gone over the cruelty of Kratos' past. There's no need to re-explain that, and on the surface, one could argue he's protecting Atreus from knowing his dad as a monster, but he also simultaneously robs Atreus of his identity because, unbeknownst to him, he's a god too. But we'll get to that realization later. Right now, the past is the last thing Kratos wants to think about, and he's forced to think about when his arm wraps loosen, revealing scars from the chains attached to his old weapons, the Blades of Chaos. There's clear shame associated with Kratos' past, and he shields himself from Atreus when he approaches him, both as a means to hide his past from Atreus and to remain as a strong and stoic figure to him, to keep the image of his masculinity intact. Now, the one thing that is present in all of these aspects that controls or even anchors Kratos into a certain way of being is that he's a father. And not just a father, but a single father. He's now the sole imprint and influence on his son, his view of the world, and how he treats the world around him and the people within it. As we previously discussed, Kratos is, for a good chunk of the game, a cold man, especially towards his son. Just one example of this is that he barely refers to his son by name, opting instead to refer to him most of the time as
Boy, 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 boy.
He is stern more often than he isn't, and seems to view Atreus more as a malleable canvas in which he wishes to paint a warrior. I mean, just take a look at this interaction at the beginning of the game.
There it is!
Hold! What are you doing? Now his guard is up. Only fire. Only fire. When I tell you to fire.
I'm sorry.
Do not be sorry. Be better.
The way Kratos conducts himself around his son also feeds into his toxic masculinity. While it's understandable for Kratos to be an authority figure with Atreus, now that he's his only parental figure, Kratos takes this to an extreme, something that is almost an embodiment of this concept of militarized masculinity coined by Stephen Klein, as described by Ewan Kirkland as, quote, being generically founded on military combat, competitive violence, and an assertion for spatial mastery through the eradication of enemies. That perfectly sums up who Kratos used to be, and while he may have distanced himself from that via time, it's still a part of him. In the context of God of War 2018, I think militarized masculinity is best seen through the small aspects of Kratos' relationship with Atreus. Coming back to this opening cutscene, Atreus refers to his father as Sir, and this is a frequent occurrence throughout the game. Kratos instills this militarized masculinity not only in himself, but now in his child, by deeply emphasizing that he is the authority figure and the authority figure alone, essentially robbing himself and his son of the emotional, personal relationship that they should have between each other, and depleting the familial and emotional significance of Kratos' role in Atreus' life. Now, I'd be remiss to stop things there. I spent around 30 hours with this game, and I'd be damned if there wasn't an ounce of character growth throughout that. Everything I've spoken about up to this point really displays how Kratos is the embodiment of this more toxic side of masculinity. He almost becomes a mirror to the player base of this franchise and of this historically hegemonic genre of entertainment. But throughout the story, Kratos learns how to adapt and accept these three things that previously aligned him with aspects of toxic masculinity. As we've continually circled back to, the game revolves around Kratos and Atreus going out on an adventure to spread the ashes of Faye, Kratos' second wife and Atreus' mother. Throughout their journey, there are little moments that show the impact that Faye had on the lives of these two, especially Atreus. Being born in Midgard, Atreus knows the Norse language, or what his mother taught him of the Norse language. Something Kratos does not know. So Kratos uses him as a tool to understand writings that the two find throughout their journey, also leading to answers of puzzles within the game. This creates a separation that was spoken about previously in the familial relationship that Kratos has with Atreus, which we'll touch on the development later. But that rift creates, for Atreus, this feeling of a lack of care about Faye from Kratos. And it all comes to a boiling point relatively early in the game, and Kratos can't help but lash out.
Not like you would even care if she was.
Mind your tongue, boy! Until our journey is over, one of us must remain focused. Do not mistake my silence for lack of grief. Mourn how you wish. Leave me to my own.
Kratos is clearly still hurting, but his lack of openness about this with his son of all people is clearly causing problems between them. And worst of all, from Atreus' perspective, it portrays Kratos as an emotionless husk. But that's not even the most important part of this scene. What I think is most important is what happens after this outburst. Take a look.
I'm sorry. I didn't realize.
No. Why would you? You do not know my ways. I know it has not been easy.
So what does this do for us as the player? How do we better understand Kratos from this interaction? Well, remember that whole emotionless husk thing I was just talking about? This sort of breaks that facade, not just for us, but for Atreus. Kratos may be a god, but he still has feelings like the mortal he chooses to live as. Him being able to communicate this with his son is not only healthy for their relationship, but it's healthy for him, his mental health, and him processing his grief. These two are both going through a life-altering experience, and it's important to have someone by your side through that. So being able to communicate that, yes, they're processing grief differently and that things are hard is very important for their relationship and for how they both get over this grieving process. This breaks down emotional barriers set by Kratos that made him a more closed-off and arguably toxic male. Being able to bring in a sense of openness about the obvious grief that both of them are experiencing is critical to Kratos becoming a better man. Instead of looking at Kratos' past, we're going to switch things up and jump to fatherhood really quickly. Throughout their adventure, Kratos is stern and protective of Atreus. Throughout the story, Kratos constantly tells Atreus things such as, "You are not ready, you lost control, the path ahead is difficult," and much, much more. It's clear that Kratos sees himself in Atreus, and he doesn't want him to make the same mistakes that he does. And all of this comes to a tipping point when Kratos finally tells Atreus he's a god. For context, prior to the events of the game, Atreus has been dealing with some sort of sickness that is debilitating. He's in bed consistently, and he's almost unable to move. Deep within the game, this sickness reveals itself again, and it's much worse than how it was described to us. And we learn the origins of this sickness this time. It's a conflict between his mind and his body. You see, when Kratos chose to live as a mortal when he came to Midgard, this meant that Atreus never knew he was a god. Kratos ends up going to Helheim to find an ingredient to help heal his son, and when Atreus finally wakes up, Farah, the witch that we spoke about previously, advises Kratos to finally tell Atreus the truth. When Kratos finally reveals to his son that he is a god, he becomes less cautious, less personable, and more focused on rage and violence. His demeanor completely changes. He even says things such as,
But we're gods. We can do whatever we want.
at this point in time, Atreus becomes a mirror to the Kratos of the past, just as Kratos is a mirror to the player base. Atreus has become a ruthless warrior who has death follow him wherever he turns. And Kratos now realizes that he's failed to protect Atreus, and now Atreus is making the same mistakes that he did. Kratos has been less of a father and more of the person who is raising Atreus by this point. But this moment forces him to reach Atreus on an emotional level, just as he did when sharing his grief. But I think the biggest shift that Kratos has as a character is how he faces his past. It's something that, as players, we only know about, but lack the details behind it, unless you've played the original trilogy. Kratos has been running from his past for years, but he's finally forced to confront it when he travels to Helheim with Atreus. Many people think of Hell as a hot and fiery place, but here, it's iced over. Kratos' current weapon, the Leviathan Axe, does ice damage, so that won't protect him here. As Freya says,
As for the dead, your frost axe will be useless. You'll need to find something else.
Then I must return home. dig up a past I swore would stay buried.
Who you were before doesn't matter. This boy is not your past, he is your son. And he needs his father.
So the only way he'll make it through Helheim is if he embraces his past and uses his old weapons, the Blades of Chaos. While here, Kratos sees a vision of him killing his father, another relic of his past. By this point in the game, Kratos has all but accepted who he once was. And by the end of the game, after finally defeating Baldur, Freya speaks to Baldur, who we earlier learned is her son. For context, Freya has made Baldur immortal, but in exchange of this, he cannot feel anything. Freya confronts him and says that making him immortal was an attempt to protect him, but also to protect herself from the grief of losing him. Baldur tells her that she ruined his life and she has to pay, and Freya offers herself up as sacrifice to show that it was all out of love. Baldur grabs her by the neck and begins to choke her, and when Kratos learns of this, he puts a stop to it and puts Baldur in a chokehold. Baldur asks why Kratos even cares, saying that he could have walked away. And Kratos quotes his own father, saying that
The cycle ends here. Must be better than this.
for snapping Baldur's neck and killing him. This line alone shows that Kratos has a goal of having Atreus be a better man than him, but it also shows that he recognizes his past and that is who he is, and he can't change that. But he must learn to be better. And I think this is best represented in the final cutscene of the game. This is an incredibly beautiful and touching scene, so I'm just going to let it play out.
What are you doing?
I have nothing more to hide.
Can we go now? We're so close.
So what can we take away from this story, from these characters, from Kratos? I think that players should look at Kratos as a positive masculine role model because he's an example of how to reinvent yourself. Players should look at him as an example of positive masculinity because of his willingness to accept his flaws. He was a bad and violent person, he was a grieving man, and he wasn't a great father. But his willingness to accept that he is all these things allows him to reflect and change. Kratos isn't a great person at the beginning of the game, and he arguably isn't by the end. He's flawed. Outside of the fact that he's a god, he's as mortal as any of us. And he's not the only one in gaming. There's others like Joel Miller in The Last of Us and Arthur Morgan from Red Dead Redemption 2. But hopefully players can find some sort of substance within Kratos' story. I mean, according to the ESA, the average gamer is 36 years old now. Most of us have been playing games for half our lives, if not more. We're not kids anymore. Life is hitting us hard, and some of the best places to find meaning is through art. But there is something special about Kratos, something that I hope was communicated to you in this video. Thanks for watching.